My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are just delighted to have with us tonight Stephanie Malia Krauss, who is author of the new book, Whole Child, Whole Life, 10 Ways to Help Kids Live, Learn, and Thrive. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thanks, Charlene. It is so good to be with you and to be with all of you. As I get ready to share my screen, if you have the ability to shift over to your chat, I would love to know who is in the virtual room. So if you in the chat, click down to go to everyone so that we can all see who is here. If you can tell me where you are zooming in from, and also, what kind of roles do you have when it comes to caring for kids? Many of us have multiple roles. Are you a parent, a grandparent, a foster parent, a teacher, a coach, a counselor? What kinds of roles do you have? So I'm going to go ahead and take just a moment to share my screen to get to the slides. I see Stephanie has gotten us started. And that we've got one parent here in the room. And so go ahead, as many different roles as you have, just add it into the chat. Thank you so much. Hold on while I share. One thing I do try to do while sharing is keep an eye on the chat. So as your responses continue to come in, I know that Charlene's co-founder will also be monitoring for questions later on. But if you have thoughts along the way, I will try to sort of at least keep an eye on that. So if you haven't been able to enter in who you are, and Edith, I see your experience there. Oh, no, Vishali with grief. We will be touching on that a little bit today. Keep those coming. But for now, we're going to go ahead and jump into the content. So today's conversation is really anchored around what my work has focused on across the last couple of decades. It's hard to believe it's been that long, but the basic idea tonight is in order for our kids to thrive, they have to be both ready for the world and able to be healthy and whole in the world. And if the job of kids is to be ready and well, then the job of us, the grown-ups who are raising them, is to help prepare them and take good care of them. And so we're going to be unpacking the science and the research on that as we move forward. So I want to tell you a little bit about me so that you understand where I'm coming from. Charlene was generous in giving a little bit of an introduction, and we'll keep this short, but just know that I am coming to you. So if I was entering my background into the chat from my basement in the St. Louis area, I'm actually on the Illinois side, and I have two school-age kids, Justice and Harrison. We call him Koa. You'll see if you're able to see the slides, there's an illustration of the two of them. We're Native Hawaiian. And so both boys have Hawaiian middle names, but my younger one goes by his full time. My work has really extended across, I sort of think about it as a horizontal and vertical profession. On the vertical, from the schoolhouse to the White House. So I started out as a pre-K teacher and then a fifth grade teacher, a middle school coach. Then I ran a high school on a technical college campus. So kind of the entire preschool to college spectrum. And then I've been working nationally for the last 10 years, which has taken me into a number of communities, including there are so many people here from California, a number of folks, a number of communities in California and the West Coast that I've worked with, and also places really throughout the US and a little bit internationally. I bring that up because I believe so strongly that context matters, culture and community matters. And what we're going to talk about today, I think in many ways has application to your kids, no matter what the context is. But we always do want to take this kind of information and figure out what makes the most sense for our own children and their situation, and the kind of conditions that they're living in. But what keeps me honest in my work and research, which really does sort of straddle this education, social work space mostly, is that as a mom, I am asking the question actively, what do my kids need to be okay? Like fundamentally, I want to make sure that I am raising good humans and that they can have a good life. And that really is kind of the heart and spirit of today's conversation. So, just so you are oriented to where we're pulling from, the information in today's conversation is going to come from two different books. I want to tell you quickly the story of how the primary book we'll be talking about, Whole Child, Whole Life, came to be. So, about 10 years ago, when I was running this high school on a technical college campus, I had a moment of realizing that graduating from high school, being able to award a high school diploma to my students really wasn't the same thing as them being truly ready for college work and life. And so I left local work and started working in education and youth development at the national level and ran a project called the Readiness Project. It was funded by the Ford Foundation. And in that project, we were really looking at the science of youth readiness. What actually do young people need to be ready for the transition into school and the transition into adulthood beyond a high school diploma? And what I learned, I knew was the information I needed as a parent, as a school leader, and as an educator. And the people who were talking about that information were in national conversations. And those of us who were raising and working with kids very often weren't in the conversation. So I wrote Making It to really get the word out back to you all on the front lines, raising kids, working with kids, about what readiness requires in a world that's changing and that's really volatile and uncertain. So, Making It came out in 2021, the height of the pandemic. The world was completely shut down. And as I went out and in this room, in this basement space, Zoomed with folks from all over the country and talked about the future, what I heard over and over again was we need to understand what young people, what our young people, our kids need for the future. And we're really worried that our kids are going to burn out or give up before we get there. As the mom of two kids, my boys are 10 and 12, I can tell you we have felt the strain in the pandemic and since on their mental health and well-being. And when I heard parents and teachers and coaches and counselors saying, what do our kids need to be well right now? It was the question I was asking in my bones. And so I recognized that my professional network included all of these academics and scholars and researchers and change makers from, all of these places who could really speak into what our kids need to be healthy, happy, and whole. And so together, that's the kind of marriage that we'll be pulling from today. To thrive in this crazy changing world, and it's so crazy and so complex, our kids have to be ready for the world as it is and for the future of the world as it will be. And they have to be able to be themselves. There has to be the space where they can be healthy, where they can be happy, when they can bring their whole selves into it. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And so to do that, I want to set historic context first. When we think about our kids, and feel free if you want to share with me sort of the age range of your children, but we are going to be talking about young people from, the littles all the way to the bigs. I think about my work as what do young people need in the first 25 years of life? So everything in the first 25 years is going to apply. when we look at that sort of early 20s group, their entire life has been defined by really unprecedented volatility and uncertainty. These are kids who were born in the days right after 9/11. They started school when the Great Recession was starting and when smart technologies came online. And then, for those who are in those young adult years, they were transitioning into adulthood or graduating from high school when the world felt like it was exploding. We had the pandemic, we had economic crises, we had racial violence. Much of that has continued. For those of you who are zooming in from California, you're well aware of the extreme weather and the changing climate. For any young person underneath that age range, 15, 13, 12, 11, 10, they have only known a world that is hyper connected and digital and deeply disruptive. And that has changed their actual wiring. So if you feel like your kids are different and that their environments and the ways that they're growing up has changed who they are and how they're living and learning, you're right on. It really has affected who they are, how they learn, how they're developing. So I am a mom who will often listen to podcasts and tune into conversations like this while I'm cooking dinner or while I'm driving. So I just want to make a note that I'm going to be talking to you. And for those of you who can see the slides, to be supportive to you. But if you're also listening, I'll try to make sure that you can follow along just with my voice. So, what we know of this whole generation of kids, birth to 25, is that they are digital and disruption natives. We know from the science that kids are wired and rewired based on their environments and their experiences. And so on the digital side, you see the practical realities of the ways in which their schooling and their living are tied up in technology. Everything from how we shop and consume and get information to sometimes, often too much, an over reliance on the use of devices and technology and platforms in school. The other part of that that is so important to understand, and I think about what's happening right now, if you've been following the news this week with various, lawsuits and what states are thinking about related to tech and social media. Many of you from the California area, you may be professionally involved in this. You have this really important intersection that has serious implications for our kids between technology and their growing up. So, young people are hyper social by design. The way that they grow and move through developmental stages is based on a social experience. We're social beings. So when the world shut down, their social interactions were limited and changed, but their biology was they still were seeking out social experiences. And for many, they were finding that online and on tech. So many platforms and programs that young people, including my own kids, are watching or engaging in, they're not designed with child development, youth development, or well-being in mind. Going onto those platforms and places makes sense because they're looking for engagement and novelty and connection. But what has ended up happening is for so many kids, the sort of parts of their brain responsible, I call it the dopamine ding, responsible for the same sort of things that get turned on with addiction. They're lighting up when they are online or when they're on some of these tech platforms. And so there's a real push and pull. There's beauty and opportunity in what it means for our kids to be digital natives. And there's real risk that we have to be navigating and we have to be learning. On the disruption side, all our kids know is volatility and uncertainty. These are COVID kids. These are kids who only know strong storms, strong wildfires. Um, they're used to this idea that the world is a precarious and often dangerous place. And so when we go out and we talk to in research, when we go out and we talk to young people, they say they want safety and security and stability, but also they don't believe it's something that they can experience in their lifetime. So there's a real stress and strain that our kids are experiencing at a kind of existential level and also practically. And many of you might be seeing that at home with anxiety levels, like anxiety and depression, symptoms of anxiety and depression have more than doubled in the last 10 years for our kids. There is hope here, and that is that our kids want to be a part of making solutions and change. And they are really positioned to be some of our most powerful change makers yet. They just need the skills and supports to do it. The reason why it's important to know that is the problems of the world can feel crushing. These are problems that we, the grown-ups, struggle to even imagine how to solve. But this is such a huge part of kids' lives, and it can be hard to see past the problems and for them to imagine a future for themselves. And one of the ways that we can help our kids imagine a future is by actually giving them ways to be active and involved in change making and solving problems. The other thing I want to just mention before we move on, because we're going to spend a great deal of time in our conversation talking about actual practices that support thriving and well-being and mental health, is giving you a little picture of what's happening to our kids' brains because of the level of volatility and uncertainty, what it means at a neurological level that they are digital and disruption natives. So if you're able to see the slide, you'll see that I have a picture of a brain and there are some headings here. And those headings might feel familiar for you as adults. I think that this is shared across adults and kids. And so that is the impact of the stress and the change and the uncertainty, the volatility, the scarcity has caused kids to kind of chronically feel overloaded, overwhelmed, distracted, stressed out, reeling from individual and collective traumas. The difference between grown-ups and children is that when we experience the overload and the overwhelm and stress and anxiety and trauma at a brain level, it takes us to the back of the brain, the oldest part of our brain, which is responsible for staying alive. And that is a different part of the brain than the front, which is responsible for learning, regulating our emotions, staying focused, staying organized, paying attention, managing our time. These pieces are a part of our executive functioning or executive functioning skills. For us as adults, that part of the brain is fully developed. But for our kids, the front of the brain doesn't fully develop until they hit their mid-20s. And so it's already under construction. It's already hard for them to focus, pay attention, stay organized, plan, regulate their emotions, stay away from distractions. And it's just that much harder for them to do it living in our world. one of the most important things that we have to do, even beyond the practices that we're going to be talking about, is when our kids come home to us, when they are with us, we have to balance the brain and body. We have to bring down the level of overload and overwhelm and distraction. And so before we move on, what I would just ask you is to think about your home environment or wherever you're caring for kids and reflect on, is it a space where when your kids come home or the kids in your life are with you in that environment, they are more or less overloaded, distracted, overwhelmed, unsafe, and unsettled. The environment outside is one thing, and it's more important than ever that we create this environment inside that not only balances the brain, but also sets up these conditions for thriving and for well-being. So now we're going to make a transition into talking about what that looks like and what we should know about it. I would say, just as a reminder, if you have questions or comments as we're moving through, feel free to put them into the chat. So before we can talk about what it means to have practices that support well-being, we have to think about it in context. Every kid is different, and every kid is going to require different things. In Whole Child, Whole Life, the book that is the most of the content for today's conversation, the entire first part of the book is about getting to know the whole child. And I think this is interesting when we think about it from a parent perspective, because we want to believe that we know our kid. Um, and yet there are things that we may not know about them that actually takes a posture of curiosity and investigation. So these 5 things that you see on the slide, and I'll make sure to read them out loud, give you a sense of how we kind of walk through to build a full high definition portrait of who our kids are. And if you know kids, you know that they are constantly changing and constantly evolving. So this is a way of getting to know who our kids are in an ongoing basis. The first piece of it, demographics and determinants, is about getting to understand how our kids experience the world based on what they look like, based on where they live, and based on who they live with and how they live. What they look like maybe will change a bit, but not as much as how they live. How they live could change dramatically depending on the environment or the circumstances around them. But it's really important for us as caregivers to get a picture of the fair or unfair treatment that our children might experience. This is especially important if our children look different from us, if they're growing up in a community that is different from the one that we grew up in. The second part of this picture is understanding how our kids are doing developmentally. So the way I want you to think about this is when we take our kids to the pediatrician's office and they give us the growth chart, and it has like the height and the weight and the BMI, and you can see how your kids are charting. Now, my younger son, Harrison, he's in the 20th percentile. He has been his whole life. And his older brother, Justice, has been in the 99th percentile for his whole life. And I rely on the pediatrician to tell me what is normal for each of my kids based on where they are. 20th percentile kid, 90th percentile kid. Well, the same thing goes for where our kids are socially, emotionally, and cognitively. The most important thing that I want you to understand here is that the pandemic sort of mixed up developmental milestones. I talk about this in the book as our kids growing up slow and fast. And um, they've been exposed to really adult things and it's aged them quickly. But developmentally, if you are thinking, God, my seventh grader is acting like a fifth grader, or my ninth grader is acting like a seventh grader, that's a pretty typical thing right now. And that's because of that hyper social piece. They couldn't develop, many of our kids, most of our kids couldn't develop the way they needed to when there was this pandemic pause in their social interactions. The other part that I think we do pretty well as parents is tapping into where our kids are health wise. But I'm just going to tell you as a former teacher and social worker that educators and school staff are not trained in pediatric and adolescent health. We don't get any training in that in social work and counseling and education. So this has to be an active conversation that you are having with the other adults who are taking care of your kid, because you all have a piece of the day and a piece of the puzzle to figure out, how is my child sleeping? How are they eating? Are they getting the movement they want? Are they sick? All of those pieces. The last two pieces are interesting for us as parents, which is our kids act different with different people and in different places. And it's really important for us to get to know that. And for our kids in particular, that can include how they act online and what their online relationships look like. So getting to know, I call this becoming like a cartographer of kids' lives, really drawing the map of who are all the people and places in my kid's life and what are they like in these spaces and where do they thrive? Like what are they enjoying the most? The last piece here is strengths and struggles, making sure that not only you really know your kid, but that there are other adults in their life who get to know who they are. I think about this as like when my child walks into a classroom, will the teacher immediately know if they're okay or if they're not okay, what's going on? So the reason why I start us here and why Whole Child, Whole Life as a book started with the portrait of a whole child is that the practices that support thriving have to be personalized to who the kid is and how the kid is living, who our children are. So I've just put up a slide of the 10 whole life practices, these science-based practices that support human thriving at every age and stage of life. But as parents and caregivers, these are the things that we need to be supporting actively. In our kids' lives, and then as they get older to those tween and teen years, helping them to figure out themselves. So there are 10 of them, and we're going to be taking the rest of our time this evening to kind of walk through how these practices are clustered. But before we do, if you do have access to video, this is going to be like the one time where I say, try to find your way back to the video. As we walk through these, it can be very easy as parents, as maybe some of you are perfectionists, to think like, how on earth can I do all these 10 things in my kids' lives? And I would say, it's okay. What the research shows is these 10 practices, things like prioritizing mental health, meeting basic needs, nurturing healthy relationships. They have to be active somewhere, anywhere in our kids' world. We may be able to address some, and we rely on the school to address others. We rely on sports teams or after school clubs and programs to address others. But in general, the reason I wanted you to come back to video if you weren't, I want to show you how this actually looks like in my house. I have committed these 10 practices to mind. And when one of my children is struggling, I run them like an inventory. And I say, okay, how are their basic needs met? yes or no, what's kind of happening in this space? How is their mental health? Are they doing things they enjoy? Are their personal interests engaged? So on the like parenting problem solver front, I use this as a natural everyday inventory. The other way that I use the practices is when I'm going to sign my kids up for an activity, or if they're in a class, I ask myself which of these are happening, which of these will be supported. But I wanted to show you. So my husband, this is what he gave me the other day for our anniversary. It's kind of a funny anniversary gift, but if you can't see it, it's a frame that has the 10 practices on them, and they're magnets. And so what we're actually doing in our house, and again, I have, a tween and a teen, is we're starting the beginning of every week where each of us, adults included, actually just chooses one that they want to focus on. So one of the practices is embrace identities and culture. And this is what my son Justice chose this week because we're Native Hawaiian, I mentioned earlier, and he wants to learn the ukulele, and he took it out this week and he started playing around with it. My 10-year-old chose nurture healthy relationships as what they wanted to focus on, because my little niece is coming and he really wants to build his relationship with her. And then my husband and I each chose one too. So I just wanted to give you that sense before we move into the different practices, because I think it's easy to think like, oh, this is so complicated, but actually we can keep it quite simple. In terms of the actual book, if you end up getting the book, the hope was to give you all of the research and insights within these pieces that we'll see in a second, so that you would have it as a resource that you could return to. We have books on, you know, babies and healthcare and what to look for at different stages. But I wanted you to have like a healthy youth development pieces. There is a question that just came in, and it is perfectly timed, about, is it better to give kids downtime to relax or put them in lots of activities? And truly, like, you could not be better timed. So we're gonna, now that you've gotten this sort of like, keep it simple, we're gonna quickly go into these practices, and you're just going to get like highlights here. So the first set of practices are these internal foundational practices, which include meeting basic needs, investing in personal interests, and prioritizing mental health. And to the participants' question, we actually find for basic needs that kids have two basic needs that are different from adults, and they are play and rest. So the truth is, our kids need downtime and they need unstructured play. So I would say we want young people connecting to their personal interests, which includes exposing to them to what they might be interested in, and then allowing them space to explore and experiment and develop expertise. But we don't want to overprogram their lives. Kids are kind of chronically in need of more rest and more unstructured play. So I am a believer in our house where our kids can choose sort of one structured thing to pursue if they're going to go for select. So I've got one select baseball player, for example. And if they're going to choose multiple, they need to be in rec sports, and my younger son has a book club in the morning, and he has a coding club in the afternoon, but especially up through middle school, you want them to be leaning into exploring their interests. This is an important part for supporting mental health as well. I'll just flag for you that we are in this mental health crisis for all the reasons we talked about early on. And what I will say to you is, we the parents, have to get ourselves educated in the same way that we learn first aid and CPR. We've got to learn mental health first aid. We need to learn the signs and symptoms. It's something I put in the book. I went to actually 50 different therapists and counselors who work with young people and said, what are the warning signs? What do we need to know? What are the steps of mental health first aid? And then how do we think as parents about, like, I don't know about your house, but I have the first aid kit with the Band-Aids and the bacitracin and the Cord-Aid and the allergy medicine and everything. But like, what I don't think about often enough is emotional wound care. What do I do when my kids are emotionally injured and hurt? What are the things that I go to? What are the salves? I'm putting that in air quotes if you can't see me, that we lean into. So that is a practice. Now, as we move through, you're going to see, like, what is good for kids is also good for us. These are things with little ones that we have to do for them. And then you can imagine as they get older, they need to learn how to meet their own basic needs, how to prioritize mental health. And then for the person who asked where to get the magnetic anniversary gift, I don't know. I've got to ask my husband where he got that. I went the wrong way. I apologize. Okay, so the next cluster of practices are the social ones. What I just need you to know, again, we don't have all of the time to be spending a day together talking about this, but the research is really clear. Our kids are social beings and relationships matter more than anything else in the world. If you want your kid to be happy, positive relationships. If you want them to do well academically, positive relationships. If you want them to live a long life, positive relationships. We are wired for it. When it comes to our kids, the relationships that matter that we need to support are the relationship they have with themselves, the relationship that they have with us, the relationship they have with each other, and then the one that we often don't tend to, the relationship that we have with the other adults in their life. So ask yourself, like, how well do I know my kid's coach? How well do I know his teachers? How do I develop relationships adult to adult? When it comes to identity development and community, what I just would love for you to walk away understanding is the base question of growing up is, who am I? Who am I? Where do I belong? Where can I be myself? And so supporting the exploration of that question is so key. The next set of practices are temporal, around time. And this is simply understanding that the past impacts us. What our kids have experienced in their past classes and grades and in the pandemic and in early childhood, we know from our own experience as adults will continue to impact us as we move into the future. And it still impacts our kids. And so we have to just hold that space to recognize that the past can show up in the present and it needs our tending to. On the other hand, a really important fact to know is that this is crazy, actually. I think it's crazy. Science has progressed so much. Our healthcare has advanced so much that when our kids have the right resources and opportunities, they should be able to, again, if they have the right resources and opportunities, and if we all don't blow ourselves up, they should be able to, as an expectation, live a 100-year life. So your kids, as an expectation, not an exception, should live to be 100 or older. That is a long life. That is the prospect of a 70 or 80-year working life, a lifetime of work. And so we have to be thinking with a long view of, like, what does it take? What do our kids need? How do we prepare and care for our kids in a way that they have the resources, internal and external, to not only live a long life, but live a long life that they love? And that I will tell you, that changes what you prioritize. when one of my kids was having a mental health struggle, I was thinking about his long life, and like supporting his mental health in that moment meant way more to me and was more important than his performance in school. So having that long view is a really critical thing. The last two practices are called transcendental practices. And these are, I call them be a force for good and seek awe and wonder. But they're service and spirituality. So not only are kids asking the question as they grow up of who am I and where do I belong and where can I be myself, they're also asking the question, am I a part of something bigger? Is there something out there? We're wired to ask those questions. And the science is very clear that those pieces, being able to be of service and see that you're contributing, and also nourishing this kind of natural inborn spirituality, is actually the most protective factor against adversity and trauma that there is. So we just, I feel like there's a little bit of grief work in raising kids right now because it's hard and it's scary. And I mean, it's really hard and scary. Yesterday marked a 1 year anniversary for my godson, who I helped raise, who was brutally shot. He survived, but he was he was injured in a school shooting, very injured. And these are the realities for our kids: school shootings, changing climate, increasing technology, political division, community division, pandemics, all of these things they know can happen. They know are real. And then all of these age-old pieces. It is really transformative to be able to know that you're a part of something bigger and better and bright, and that there is a world that's beautiful, worth fighting for or being a part of. So this last slide here before we open up for some time for questions. So be thinking about what your questions are. And maybe I'll like text my husband for where he got, I think he got the magnetic anniversary gift from Etsy. But the where I want to kind of land is back where I started when I showed the magnetic gift, which is our job as the grown-ups is to educate ourselves. It's why I wrote the book on the science and the art of how we support our kids in these 10 practices. And I would say how we support ourselves in these 10 practices. My best girlfriend and I, when I was writing the book, we turned these 10 practices into Lenten practices. And we did it family-wide. How were we supporting and prioritizing our mental health? And how were we supporting the mental health of our kids? So it became this kind of like way of life. So we have to get ourselves educated. What do we need to know about mental health? What do we need to know about basic needs? What do we need to know about identity development? You know, it's really problematic that like we have this job to do raising these humans, but we don't get educated and we don't get the training we need and how to do it. And the world is crazy and changing. And so educating ourselves is a part of it in these 10 areas. The second is making decisions about how our kids are spending time and who they're spending time with based on whether they contribute to these areas. What I would say is baseline, do no harm. If there is an adult or an activity that is actively doing harm to one of these 10 areas, doing harm to your kids' identities and cultures, doing harm to their sense of belonging, that is when you take action. That is when you get involved. But as much as possible, we want to go to like net positive. And then the third is to keep it simple where you can, to think about like, how do we just build this into our lives, like the magnetic board, and make it a part of the conversation that our kids are having. Here is when you know it is going right. These are the 5 things to look for that will show you that your child is thriving. They feel safe and supported. They are healing. It is an active process. They are moving forward. They feel rooted, connected. They feel grounded. You see that they're learning. You see that they're not stuck. And there is a level of joy in their life, of purpose in their life. If one of these lights is off, if your kids are chronically not able to feel safe and supported, or they're not learning and growing like they should, then that is when they need support. That is when they need services. I'll leave you with this. It's a quote from the book, and I'm going to read it for anybody who's listening, and then we'll open up for questions. I know there were a couple that came through. It can be hard to prioritize these whole life practices where there is so little time and competing demands. Stay motivated. These are what matter most for kids. And when they're not present, young people struggle and suffer unnecessarily. When they are in place, young people experience health and happiness, and they are better able to learn and develop. So this really does become not a program or a framework, but a way in which we parent, a way in which we care for our kids. And there's a lot of science and a lot of art too. And we can be really good sometimes at one or the other, but it's the blending, the kind of alchemy, where the sweet spot is. For those of you who are able to see the screen, I flipped it just before we, as we move over to Q&A, there's a little QR code. Bev was so great sharing the Amazon links, which are easy, one click if you're interested in getting a copy of Whole Child, Whole Life, or of making it. If you're somebody who always likes to save a little bit and you're okay with a couple more clicks, I wanted to give you a coupon code directly from the publisher. So it's up there on Corwin's website, and the code is SAVE20. So that should work for all of this week. I'm going to invite Charlene to come back on, and hopeful that we can make the most of our 8 minutes. I went a little over our 8 minutes of questions.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. You've given us a wonderful roadmap to having kids who are healthy and thriving. It's just such important things to know and remember, parents. And so again, as a developmental educator, I just want to start by asking you, I pretty much know what I think you'll say, but let's ask, why is it so important to focus on the whole child, whether your child is 5 or 15 or 25?
It's really easy for us to compartmentalize pieces of who kids are by saying, well, who are they as a student? Or who are they as an athlete? But from a kid's perspective, they're bringing the whole of themselves onto the field and into the classroom. And so when we get to really consider the whole of who they are, we can really figure out the best ways to not only support them, but to see them fully and to support where they're going. And that gets back to preparing and caring. When we get to know the whole of who they are, we are much better able to care for them. And we're able to see where they're heading, and we're better able to equip them for that. The way that I think about this from a teacher perspective, though, Charlene, is if my 5th grader were to go into Miss Dawson's class and say, oh, Miss Dawson, I want to tell you all about what happened this weekend. And if she looked at him with all the professionalism and said, oh, honey, you are just my student. We only talk about school here. It would just crush him. And so we just have to realize, like, the kids are whole humans and they're living their lives and they deserve to be seen in that way.
Absolutely. So we have some really good questions coming in. Let's just dive in,
Right.
Stephanie. Here's one I love. Um, attendee says, thank you for touching on grief. How can we help our children and their schools be more grief aware?
So this is something I'm really passionate about. And so thank you for that question. And I think it's really crucial. I actually have a whole section on the Prioritize Mental Health chapter on grief and loss, because many schools have, thank goodness, started to get training in trauma-informed care, but they don't realize that grief is different. A lot of overlap, but that we actually need to understand what grief looks like and what grief looks like at different stages. And so if you are a part of a PTO, or if you have a relationship with a teacher or a counselor in your school, I would ask them, do you do trainings? Do you get professional development on grief and loss? And if they say, we do trauma-informed care, you can say, I think that's different. This is a great place if you have relationships with children's hospitals or with therapists, to have them come into the school and partner to provide some training the exact same way that they might get first responders from the fire department to come in and provide training on using an AED, or the police department to do an intruder drill. We've got to get better training on grief specifically.
We're fortunate here in the Bay Area to have an organization called CARA that is 40 years old, and their focus is all on grief. So there are some of those videos, parents, on our video library if you're interested. Okay, more great questions. These are such good ones. Here's a great one. How do you teach kids how to regulate their big emotions? My son gets very agitated under stress or noisy environments when he's trying to read or write. His emotions are so dramatic. He blows up, drops his shoulders, his whole body language shows his frustration. So again, how do we help kids regulate their big emotions? I know we have to kind of move quickly here because I want to get through a few more. That's a big question for 1 minute.
It is a big question. The thing that I would just remind the person who asks is that the big emotions live in the same part of the brain as focus, time management, planning, organization, executive functioning skills. So there are two pieces here. One is you can be researching and looking for ways to strengthen your son's executive functioning skills. Think about it like a bowling lane, putting the like bumpers in. He's going to need some life hacks to support him. And the second is working with the other adults in his life for what does he do when he gets overstimulated? That's something I talk about in the book. Are there ways, and maybe he needs a 504 plan or something that's more formal, but there's great ways that don't require a plan, of being able to wear headphones. I have earplugs myself that just reduce the level of noise, but I can still hear people talking. Where does he sit when he goes into a crowded cafeteria? All of those kinds of pieces can just help provide small supports that increase that feeling of safety and security. And when that's present, it can have an exponential impact on his overall well-being.
Thank you. Really good advice. Really good advice. Okay, here's another good question. Do you have any recommendation for where to start when we can see there may be more than one area of your 10 that are lacking?
So I would say in that case, let your kid lead and choose one that they want to work on. And then you can choose, I would look at those kind of clusters. So it may be that you choose the social cluster of relationships and community and the culture and identity. And you're going to focus on, you know, connections with family members who kind of hit all three areas. They can support your kid's cultural identity, they can be nourishing positive relationships, and they're a strong community. So what you want to think about is, you know, you think about this as the architecture for kids' lives. Where are the soft spots? And where the soft spots are, like mental health or relationships, that's where you and your partner or other adults in the kid's life are going to look to provide services and supports, but then let your kid lead. Let them choose the one they want to focus on for a day or for a week.
Really good ones. Well, Stephanie, we've almost gotten to the end of our time together, so I'm just quickly going to ask, this is a really good question. What's a sign to know when your child really needs help or something seems off?
Yeah. If you're asking that question, your child probably needs help. So I think, I actually, so if you go to wholechildwholelife.com and you click on resources, there are some of the resources from the book that are free. And actually, if you email me, I know that we're going to very quickly run out of time, but I'm going to put up my email address. If you don't see it, just email me. Those symptoms of possible mental health challenge I would look at, but the primary thing is if your kid seems off, something is off and it's worth investigating, and it should be both physical health and mental health. Get blood work done in addition to having an exploratory conversation with a counselor, and talk to the other adults in your kid's life to see if they're noticing something too.
All right, really well said. You talk about having adults who cross-train, and I think that's part of it, right? We all have to be looking at the children together as one child.
Yep.
So, Stephanie, we've come to the end of our wonderful hour together, but I really want to ask you, based on everything you've seen and the worries that we have for our kids, what gives you hope today?
I really do have hope. So much so, I think our kids are incredible. Seeing the incredible resiliency and strength and creativity that they still have coming out of the past few years is so very powerful. And so if we keep our kids at the center and we think about what is possible for them, then we can see that our job is to prepare them for the world, but also to protect their ability to be kids. And so looking at my kids, we do favorite moments every single day at dinner, and hearing what they have to say always gives me hope.
Thank you. That's really beautiful. And thank you, everybody, for these wonderful emojis. Stephanie, it shows how grateful people are for what you said tonight. So thank you, everybody. Someone asked if you're going to have another webinar. I think I would direct them to your website. They can look for resources. And we do encourage everybody to pick up this wonderful book. It's filled full of ideas and activities. I think maybe, Stephanie, you're going to put that link back up.
Yes, absolutely. So I would say the best way to get a copy of the book is you can go all the way up in the chat to where Bev put the Amazon link. That's your easy one click. Or if you go to wholechildwholelife.com, you have all the possible buying options that you could imagine, and you just choose the one that you like best. If you go to Corwin, Save 20 is going to give you 20% off.
Okay, well, thank you, Stephanie Malia Krauss, for a wonderful evening. Thank you, everybody who is with us, for being so engaged and sharing and talking. It's been a great session, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Good night, everybody. Take care.
Thanks so much.